What was running through your head in that specific moment? It must have been incredibly emotional. That was the first time the reality of it all truly settled in. I gathered my staff and my crew to tell them, and that was profoundly emotional. I am just so glad I got the chance to tell them everything in my own words before the story was leaked to the press. In the blink of an eye, Ellen DeGeneres transformed from America's sweetheart into one of the most disliked figures in the country. She soaked up the daily adoration of laughter and applause, all while a storm was brewing behind the scenes as 36 employees came forward to expose the toxic workplace. She commanded a place where staff were callously fired for attending funerals allegedly subjected to sexual harassment in bathrooms and strictly forbidden from even looking at her. To be honest, I probably have no idea how I'm actually going to feel when it happens. I had a conversation with a woman who told me, "You are going to launch a completely new career when you're 45 and you can ride that for another 20 years if you really want to." And my first thought was, who in the world starts over from scratch in Hollywood at the age of 45? The icon who meticulously built a billion-dollar media empire on the simple motto, "Be kind," was accused of cultivating a deeply ingrained culture of fear, racism and abuse that spanned nearly 2 decades. What was truly taking place behind those closed studio doors? Is her career officially over? Stay with us as we uncover the real reasons why so many people now harbour such strong feelings against Ellen DeGeneres. The scandal of 2020, triggered by a bombshell BuzzFeed investigation, did far more than just uncover isolated incidents of misconduct. It exposed a deeply rooted system of abuse that was protected by an impenetrable wall of silence. Countless current and former employees described a workplace environment dominated by arbitrary punishments and the absolute unchecked power of its leaders. Needing to take bereavement leave to mourn a parent's passing was something that could easily get you fired. Daring to speak to Ellen or even making eye contact with her were considered grounds for immediate termination. The racial dynamics at play were profoundly disturbing. Numerous black women recounted nearly identical experiences where their natural hairstyles were labelled unprofessional. Their very presence was questioned and their valid concerns were consistently brushed aside. This wasn't a case of some unconscious bias creeping in. This was explicit, undeniable discrimination coming directly from senior producers who never faced any repercussions for their actions. Ed Glavin's tyrannical presence reportedly lasted for over 7 years. His alleged pattern of behaviour was disturbingly consistent physical intimidation directed towards women, baseless firings of male employees, and issuing threats against anyone who dared to challenge his authority. He dismissed 9 stage managers within a single season, almost all of whom were men reportedly because Ellen had a preference against male staff members. The power hierarchy was starkly clear. Glavin was the enforcer for Ellen's alleged whims, creating a buffer that shielded her from any direct accountability for the toxic atmosphere. The abuse attributed to Kevin Lehman took on a different form, but it was shielded by the very same system of protection. The notorious 2013 bathroom incident, where he allegedly cornered a junior writer to solicit sexual favours, should have marked the immediate end of his career. However, formal complaints that were filed against him in 2014 were systematically buried and ignored. He allegedly went on groping assistants, making unwelcome sexual advances and dangling career opportunities as a tool to leverage sexual favours. His victims felt they had to remain silent, knowing that speaking out would mean career suicide. The most bone-chilling aspect of this whole saga was the calculated and deliberate nature of the cruelty. The producer, who was forced to decide between his child's urgent bone marrow transplant and the show's taping schedule, wasn't just navigating a simple scheduling conflict. He was being subjected to a cruel loyalty test. The unspoken rule was clear: the show is the top priority, always. Family emergencies, severe health crises, personal grief, none of that held any weight. The staff had to create coping mechanisms just to survive the workday. Women began moving around the office in pairs to avoid being cornered by Glavin. Men learned to completely avoid Ellen's wife, Portia. Every single person learned how to read Ellen's moods, how to preempt her dissatisfaction, and ultimately how to make themselves as invisible as possible. The show churned through production crew members at an astonishingly high rate, but every single departure was simply brushed off as part of the normal industry turnover. The Human Resources Department was a catastrophic failure. When employees came forward to report racist jokes being made in the writers' room, they found themselves unemployed just a few weeks later. After one staff member returned from a medical leave following a self-harm attempt, they were swiftly let go. The underlying message was loud and clear. If you make a complaint, you are immediately expendable. What made the scandal so incredibly damaging was the staggering level of hypocrisy. Ellen had carefully crafted her entire public brand around concepts of kindness, universal acceptance, and pure joy. Every single episode concluded with her signature sign-off, "Be kind to one another." She famously gave away millions of dollars in prizes to her audience. She would dance through the aisles, seemingly spreading boundless happiness. The cognitive dissonance between her on-screen persona and the alleged behind-the-scenes behaviour was absolutely mind-boggling. On August 17, 2020, Warner Media finally fired Kevin Lehman, Ed Glavin, and Jonathan Norman. Lehman and Norman vehemently denied the allegations. Glavin offered no public statement, but the firings only occurred after intense media pressure made their positions untenable. For years upon years, complaints had been formally lodged, only to be systematically ignored. The entire system was designed to protect those in power, and it only buckled when public exposure made accountability unavoidable. The one question that still haunts everyone involved is, did Ellen know? And if she truly was unaware, how could that possibly be? Ellen DeGeneres was born on January 26, 1958 in Metairie, Louisiana, into a home strictly governed by the rigid doctrines of Christian Science. Her father, Elliot, who worked as an insurance salesman and served as a church first reader, enforced a strict set of beliefs that prohibited drinking, smoking, swearing, any form of emotional expression, and all modern medicine. Astonishingly, Ellen did not see a doctor for the first time until she was 13 years old. In her world, getting sick was seen as a result of insufficient prayer. Experiencing pain was considered a sign of spiritual failure. She later recalled how she never truly knew how anyone in her family was actually feeling. Emotions were treated as a sign of weakness. Showing vulnerability was akin to a sin. Children were taught to perform normalcy at all times, no matter what their internal reality was. This intense childhood conditioning, learning to mask pain, project an image of happiness, and conceal the truth, would go on to define both her style of comedy and the very culture of her workplace. The fragile sense of normalcy Ellen knew completely disintegrated with her parents' divorce in 1974. At just 15 years old, the news hit her like a tidal wave she never saw coming. Growing up in a household where emotions were kept under tight lock and key, there were simply no warning signs for her to see. The impending split was a complete shock. In the aftermath, the family was split apart. Her mother, Betty, moved with Ellen to the small town of Atlanta, Texas, while her brother Vance remained behind to live with their father. Suddenly, Ellen was forced to become the grown-up in the relationship, tasked with propping up her heartbroken mother while grappling with her own profound feelings of being left behind. Then, in 1976, a new man entered their lives when Betty remarried a man named Roy Grusendorf. As if the upheaval wasn't enough, that very same year brought a terrifying diagnosis. Betty had breast cancer. The necessary life-saving mastectomy flew in the face of their religious beliefs, which condemned such procedures, forcing the entire ordeal to be shrouded in a heavy, unspoken silence. At only 16, Ellen dutifully nursed her mother back to health, assisting with recovery exercises and tending to her surgical wounds, all while the massive contradiction, the clash between their faith and her mother's very survival, was never once mentioned aloud. He cunningly used her mother's recent cancer diagnosis as a weapon, preying on Ellen's naivety about her own body and personal boundaries by insisting he needed to examine her breasts for lumps. The violations grew progressively worse, culminating in a terrifying. Consumed by sheer terror, Ellen smashed through a window to escape and even sought refuge in a hospital at night just to find a sense of security. For many years that followed, she kept this horrifying experience to herself. At the time, she couldn't even articulate the violation she was enduring, and worse, she internalized the guilt, convincing herself that she should have somehow prevented it from happening. She carried the immense burden of shame that rightfully belonged to the man who abused her. Yet when she finally found the courage to confide in her mother, Betty, she was met with shocking disbelief. In a stunning betrayal, Betty remained with Roy for another 18 years, right up until his death in 1997. This profound betrayal, watching her own mother side with the very person who had violated her, shattered something deep and essential within Ellen's world. From this experience, Ellen absorbed a set of brutal life lessons. Loyalty was never guaranteed. The promise of protection was a complete illusion, and telling the truth only led to severe punishment. Her mother's outright rejection hammered home a chilling message. The facade of a perfect family was far more important than her own well-being and safety. It wasn't until 2005 that Ellen first spoke publicly about her ordeal, and she revisited the painful topic in 2019 with the determined hope that her story might empower other survivors. However, by that point, the psychological damage was already deeply ingrained, the result of a childhood devoid of any language for feelings and compounded by a religious upbringing that insisted on absolute flawlessness. This was further fractured by a divorce that ripped away her sense of stability, the injustice of abuse that faced no repercussions, and the ultimate heartbreak of a mother who picked her abuser over her own child. These experiences weren't merely a series of traumatic events, they were a form of harsh conditioning. Ellen mastered the art of concealing her anguish with comedy, internalizing the belief that no matter what chaos unfolded behind the scenes, the performance must always continue. The very woman who would later construct a global empire built on the concept of curated happiness was herself shaped in a damaging world where authentic emotions were strictly off limits. In her early life, survival was entirely dependent on delivering a flawless performance. This mindset would carry her from a series of go-nowhere jobs all the way to the legendary stage of The Tonight Show. Ellen successfully completed her studies and received her diploma from Atlanta High School back in 1976. However, her university career was cut short when she left the University of New Orleans after just a single semester, as the recent divorce of her parents had left her in a precarious financial situation with no support. She took on a long string of jobs to make ends meet, working alongside her cousin Laura at a law firm, then moving between retail at JCPenney, waiting tables at TGI Fridays, painting houses, mixing drinks as a bartender, and seating guests as a hostess, anything to simply get by. A professional career in comedy seemed like an impossible fare-off fantasy. But at the age of 22, a devastating tragedy became the very catalyst for a profound personal transformation. During this period of her life, Ellen found herself deeply in love with a woman named Kat Perkoff. The couple was on a temporary break when in 1980, Ellen came upon the chaotic scene of a terrible car accident. She had no way of knowing that Kat was one of the victims. The horrifying truth was revealed the very next morning with devastating news. Kat had died at the tragically young age of 23. Unable to afford the apartment they had shared, Ellen found herself completely alone, sleeping on a mattress in a flea-ridden basement, consumed by grief and utterly destitute. It was in this moment of absolute despair that a bizarre, almost surreal question popped into her head. How could it be that her wonderful girlfriend was gone while these miserable fleas were allowed to live on and thrive? This strange, poignant question became the foundational seed for Phone Call to God, the very first full comedy routine she ever wrote and performed. She somehow managed to channel her excruciating loss into a unique brand of observational humour, discovering her comedic voice in the midst of utter personal devastation. Then in 1981, she confidently strode into Clyde's Comedy Club in New Orleans and announced she was a comedian armed with no professional experience whatsoever, just her raw, unfiltered pain moulded into a series of jokes. By 1982, she took a major leap and entered the Showtime's Funniest Person in America contest, and she won. That single victory was a complete game changer, catapulting her from barely earning tip money to achieving nationwide fame almost instantly. Following her win, she relocated to San Francisco, diving headfirst into the city's vibrant comedy scene. She became a regular at legendary venues like the Punchline and Cobb's Comedy Club, grinding it out with several performances a night, many of which were for no pay at all. Her comedic approach was noticeably different. It was clean, based on everyday observations, and had a gentle quality that stood in stark contrast to the much rougher, edgier comics popular during that period. Despite this clear difference in style, she remained incredibly persistent, relentlessly honing her comedic timing and refining her unique voice in front of one tough audience after another. In November of 1986, the coveted invitation from The Tonight Show finally arrived. On the very day of her performance, in a moment of pure chaos, she forgot to set her parking brake and had to sprint down Melrose Avenue after her runaway car right before she was due to perform the very routine that grew from Kat's tragic death. The legendary host, Johnny Carson, was absolutely captivated and impressed by her performance. He then did something completely unprecedented. He beckoned her over to the guest couch, an honour he had never before bestowed upon a female comedian making her debut appearance on his show. That single moment on television turned her into a household name. Carson's incredible stamp of approval flung open the doors to television, leading to a role on Open House in 1989, a series that unfortunately only ran for 24 episodes. Her next show, Laurie Hill, in 1992, was even shorter-lived, cancelled after just 5 airings. Yet television critics unanimously agreed that Ellen was the sole bright spot and the only reason to tune in, a fact that network executives filed away for future reference. 2 years later, in 1994, those same executives built a new show around her called These Friends of Mine, which was officially retitled simply Ellen the following year in 1995. For a remarkable 109 episodes, Ellen skillfully portrayed the endearingly anxious bookstore owner, Ellen Morgan. The sitcom enjoyed solid success, but remained largely conventional until the 22nd episode of its 4th season. By this point, Ellen had already masterfully converted her childhood trauma into comedic gold and spun a deeply personal tragedy into national stardom. However, her groundbreaking decision to come out publicly would soon teach her a very harsh lesson that the adoration she received from America was entirely and painfully conditional. The moment she shared her truth and how it almost obliterated her entire career. It all started on April 30th, 1997, when the character Ellen Morgan revealed she was gay on national television just a couple of weeks after Ellen DeGeneres herself made headlines with a groundbreaking Time magazine cover on April 14th bearing just 3 simple words. "Yep, I'm gay." That historic episode pulled in an astonishing 42 million viewers, but the triumph was immediately met with a tidal wave of public outrage. The network's mailroom was deluged with thousands upon thousands of angry letters. The hostility reached a terrifying peak when a bomb threat was called into the studio, which by sheer luck happened after filming had concluded. Ellen would later confess that in that moment she experienced a level of fear she had never known before. With an audience of 42 million, that single episode became the network's most watched programme of the entire year. It was a monumental achievement, a brave stand, and ultimately an act of career self-sabotage. What came next was far from a victory lap. It was a brutal backlash that would sideline her for the better part of 6 years. The network executives were clearly terrified. They began plastering parental advisories on all future episodes, cautioning audiences about the presence of same-sex relationships as though it was some kind of dangerous or inappropriate material. Predictably, the ratings went into a freefall. The sitcom, which held the 30th spot in 1997, plummeted to 45th by 1998, hemorrhaging 1/3 of its entire audience in the process. The network allowed for the filming of 3 additional episodes, but then refused to broadcast 2 of them. One of the unaired episodes included a same-sex kiss, a moment they decided was simply too much for viewers to handle. By May of 1998, the show was officially axed, with 2 completed episodes left unseen in the network vault. And it was during this chaotic period that Anne Heche came into the picture. The two were a public couple from 1997 to the year 2000, and it became painfully obvious the public wasn't ready to accept them. This was never more clear than when they attended the premiere of the movie Volcano together. Anne later claimed she was told that her job was on the line. A studio executive supposedly gave her an ultimatum she couldn't star alongside Harrison Ford if she chose to stay with Ellen. While on the red carpet, security guards actually tapped them on the shoulder, informing them they were not permitted to be photographed with each other. The message couldn't have been more blunt. Just vanish. Their relationship officially dissolved in the year 2000. The very next day, Anne was discovered in a stranger's home in Fresno, completely disoriented, referring to herself as Celestia and rambling about spaceships. It turned out she had taken ecstasy as she was grappling with profound childhood trauma, culminating in what would become one of Hollywood's most infamous and publicly dissected relationship collapses. In the aftermath, Ellen found herself completely ostracized by the industry. After a string of 2 failed sitcoms in just 4 years, she gave it another shot with a series called The Ellen Show in 2001, where she played a high-powered tech executive moving back home. The series was a spectacular failure. It lasted for only 13 episodes before the network pulled the plug in January of 2002. That made 3 sitcom flops in the span of 8 years. It looked like her television career was officially over. What's heartbreaking is that the coming out itself should have been a moment of celebration. The act was courageous, culturally necessary, and absolutely revolutionary. Ellen had become the first person to portray an openly gay lead character on primetime network television. She forged a path for the kind of LGBTQ representation that seems commonplace today but was utterly revolutionary back then. But courage offers no shield from the fallout. Those parental warnings from the network sent a very specific message that gay people were not appropriate for family television. The collapse in viewership demonstrated that America's acceptance of the gay community was largely hypothetical, not something they were ready to see in their living rooms. The public's reaction to her relationship with Anne Heche proved that Hollywood would actively penalise visibility. Consequently, Ellen spent 4 long years in a professional wasteland with no show, no public platform, and no clear path back. The very woman who had famously made Carson double over with laughter, who had meticulously built a successful sitcom and who had taken the single biggest risk of her life, was now completely unemployable. This period is absolutely critical because of what it taught Ellen about pure survival. The lesson was that her authenticity had led to total destruction. She learned that displaying vulnerability would only bring punishment. Being true to herself had cost her everything she had built. The message was received loud and clear. You must always control the narrative. You must carefully manage public perception. And you must never under any circumstances allow them to see you as weak. So when Ellen finally re-emerged in 2003 with her daytime talk show, she had clearly learned those lessons by heart. Her new show would project unrelenting positivity. She would use dance to literally sidestep any criticism. She would hand out vast sums of money to generate goodwill. She would construct a media empire founded on a carefully crafted persona of kindness while simultaneously wielding absolute authority behind the curtain. That public declaration may have destroyed her career at the time, but in doing so, it taught her a critical lesson about the power of perception and image management. The tragedy is she appeared to have learned all the wrong lessons which she would then use to build her billion-dollar daytime television empire. The Ellen DeGeneres Show made its debut on September 8, 2003, broadcasting from the relatively small Studio 11 in Burbank. Frankly, no one anticipated it would go anywhere. Ellen's format was simple. She danced, she distributed gifts, and she created an atmosphere where celebrities felt completely at ease. And for some reason, it resonated deeply with audiences. The show took home an incredible 15 daytime Emmys within its first 3 seasons. This was completely unheard of. By 2005, the show was attracting 2 million viewers every single day. The strategy behind it all was utterly brilliant. It was a strategy of radical positivity. Following years of being a target of negativity, Ellen consciously created a television space that felt secure, cheerful, and incredibly benevolent. Her famous 12 Days of Giveaways special showered each lucky audience member with more than $3,000 worth of gifts over a 12-episode run. She was creating viral content before most other programs even knew what YouTube was. By 2008, the program had outgrown its home and needed a much larger space. The new stage was eventually renamed the Ellen Stage by the studio in 2015, cementing her legacy there. The final statistics are simply staggering. Over 19 seasons, she produced 3,339 episodes, earned 71 Emmy nominations with 63 wins, and commanded an audience of 4.2 million viewers at its peak. Ellen completely revolutionised daytime television, primarily because she grasped the immense power of social media long before any of her competitors did. Short clips from her show became a dominant force in the early days of viral video culture, which massively amplified her reach far beyond what traditional ratings could measure. The film Finding Nemo officially premiered on May 30th, 2003. But what many don't realise is that Ellen began recording her voice work for Dory as far back as 1998. In fact, director Andrew Stanton had written the character with her voice specifically in mind. That movie went on to earn an incredible $941 million across the globe. Ellen's voice work for the character became absolutely iconic. Her scene attempting to speak whale is a universally beloved classic. She then tirelessly campaigned for a sequel which was finally released in 2016. Back in 2008, on a sun-drenched August 16th, Ellen DeGeneres and Portia de Rossi exchanged vows in an incredibly intimate ceremony at their lavish Beverly Hills estate, attended by just 19 close friends and family, with both brides stunning in custom-designed Zac Posen gowns. 2 years later, in 2010, Portia cemented their union, legally officially changing her name to Portia Lee James DeGeneres, although for her professional acting career, she wisely continued to use her well-known stage name. The absolute zenith of Ellen's influence arrived on the star-studded night of March 2nd, 2014, the evening she took the stage to host the Academy Awards. During the show, she orchestrated what would become the most legendary selfie in internet history, cramming Hollywood royalty like Jennifer Lawrence, Meryl Streep, Bradley Cooper, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie into a single iconic frame. That one spontaneous photo shattered online records, racking up an astonishing 3.3 million retweets and momentarily overwhelming Twitter's servers, all while a massive audience of 43 million people tuned in to watch her host. Her dominance was solidified as she ascended to become the undisputed queen of daytime television, commanding an incredible annual salary of $75 million. Then on November 22nd, 2016, she received one of the nation's highest honours from President Obama, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Tears streamed down Ellen's face as he praised her courage for shouldering the immense weight of coming out publicly when few others would ultimately helping to forge a more truthful and accepting world. On that prestigious stage, she was in the company of other American icons, standing shoulder to shoulder with legends like Tom Hanks, Bruce Springsteen and Michael Jordan. Yet all this phenomenal success was a carefully constructed facade hiding deep-seated issues. Behind the scenes, the entire DeGeneres empire operated on one single unwavering principle: Ellen's absolute control. Employees quickly discovered that their job security hinged entirely on maintaining her good mood. The constant dancing, the lavish giveaways, and that famous "be kind" mantra were far more than just clever marketing. In reality, these elements were a suit of armour, a strategic defence mechanism designed to ensure she would never ever be perceived as vulnerable again. Ellen had meticulously constructed the perfect environment for herself, a powerful platform where she dictated every detail, where relentless positivity was a non-negotiable rule, and where no hint of criticism could ever break through her defences. Runaway success of her show served as constant validation for this tightly controlled method. Sky-high ratings were undeniable proof that the public adored the persona she presented. A mountain of awards confirmed her critical acclaim, and the immense wealth she generated demonstrated her commercial value. From the outside, the empire was a glittering monument to success, but on the inside, it was profoundly and fundamentally broken. For a long time, the television audience remained oblivious. There were deeply uncomfortable on-air moments that most people simply dismissed or overlooked, like one particular incident in November of 2019. It happened when actress Dakota Johnson calmly and publicly corrected Ellen during a live taping. The host had attempted a light-hearted joke teasing Dakota about not receiving an invitation to her 30th birthday party. Without missing a beat, Dakota stared straight at her and replied, "Actually, no, that's not the truth, Ellen. You were invited." As a look of genuine surprise flashed across Ellen's face, Dakota pressed on saying, "Ask everybody." She then pointedly added, "Ask Jonathan, your producer." Cornered on her own show, a flustered Ellen was forced to awkwardly backtrack, admitting that she must have had a scheduling conflict. It was a strikingly raw television moment, someone finally standing up to Ellen on her own turf. Viewers at home sensed something was off. This was authentic discomfort, not a pre-planned bit for comedic effect. But Taylor Swift had endured an even more cringe-worthy experience years earlier, back in 2012. During her interview, Ellen relentlessly prodded her about supposedly dating actor Zac Efron, a rumour Taylor repeatedly denied. Ellen stubbornly persisted, insisting yes you did, as the studio audience laughed along. The host then forced Taylor into a game where she had to ring a bell whenever a picture of someone she had dated appeared on a large screen behind them. Taylor was visibly distressed and pleaded with Ellen, saying she didn't want to participate because the whole premise made her feel extremely uncomfortable. Despite her guest's plea, Ellen pushed forward with the segment anyway. Taylor, looking as if she was about to cry, asked, "Do you have any idea how bad this makes me feel?" That painful clip would later resurface and go viral on TikTok years after it first aired. A new generation of viewers saw the interaction in a completely different light. It wasn't playful teasing, it was just plain cruel. Yet the infamous incident involving Mariah Carey from 2008 was somehow even darker. At the time, rumours were circulating that the legendary singer might be pregnant. To address this on air, Ellen wheeled out a bottle of champagne and declared, "Let's toast to you not being pregnant." A visibly cornered Mariah protested, calling it out as pure peer pressure, but she reluctantly took a tiny sip to appease the host. Ellen immediately shouted triumphantly, "You're pregnant." In the moment, it was framed as a funny gotcha segment. The tragic reality which Mariah revealed years later was that she suffered a miscarriage shortly after that taping. She had been in the very early stages and wasn't ready to share the news publicly. That on-air spectacle wasn't just awkward television. For Mariah, it was absolutely devastating. Comedian Kathy Griffin's long-running feud with Ellen dated all the way back to 1996 during a guest appearance on Ellen's sitcom. The tension began when she was instructed to sing a jingle during the initial table read. Griffin later said that the condescending way Ellen delivered the order was deeply humiliating. Their already frosty relationship deteriorated completely after the passing of comedy legend Joan Rivers, when Griffin reached out asking for Ellen's participation in a tribute. Ellen flatly refused to participate, allegedly dismissing Joan as having been mean. This response sent Griffin into a rage, and she later detailed the entire exchange in her 2017 memoir, though she never mentioned Ellen by name. Despite the anonymity, everybody in the industry knew exactly who she was writing about. Griffin also publicly claimed that Ellen had used her influence to get her banned from her dressing room at the Emmy Awards. Famed chef Gordon Ramsay was reportedly blacklisted from the show after he complained that the meat provided for a cooking segment had gone bad. Ellen allegedly instructed her producers in no uncertain terms, "Don't ever let this guy on the show again." All of these incidents revealed a disturbing pattern. Ellen consistently weaponized her power to embarrass, dismiss, or outright punish anyone who crossed her. What millions of viewers perceived as harmless, playful teasing was frequently a form of coercion. The entire structure of Ellen's power relied on her guests willingly playing the submissive roles she assigned them. The moment Dakota Johnson refused to play along the carefully constructed facade began to show serious cracks. For so long, the public had made excuses for these uncomfortable exchanges, telling themselves that Ellen was just joking. The common refrains were that celebrities are accustomed to being teased, or that it was all simply in good fun. But when viewed together, the pattern of behaviour was unmistakable. Time and again, Ellen's brand of humour came directly at the expense of others, and the severe power imbalance on her set meant that people could not fight back without risking professional consequences. These were not a few isolated bad days. Instead, they were troubling glimpses into a deeply systemic problem, a toxic culture that would finally and spectacularly explode into public view in the summer of 2020. Following the public outcry, parent company Warner Media launched an internal investigation which resulted in the termination of 3 of the show's top executive producers. The official Warner Media probe ultimately confirmed what the bombshell BuzzFeed news report had first alleged: a complete and systematic failure of leadership at every level of the production. One black employee recounted a senior writer casually remarking, "I only know the names of the white people who work here," while another former staffer who returned to work after a mental health crisis and a self-harm attempt was abruptly let go soon after. In another damning example of the toxic environment, a female employee who dared to complain about racist jokes being told in the writer's room found her contract terminated just 2 weeks later. The Human Resources Department was described as being completely ineffective, leaving former employees feeling utterly trapped, powerless, and with nowhere to turn for help. In a video conference call with over 200 members of her staff, Ellen herself admitted that the show had been run like a well-oiled machine, and not, as she put it, like a place for human beings. The first heads rolled on August 17th, 2020, when Warner Media officially terminated 3 of the show's most senior producers, Kevin Lehman, Ed Glaven, and Jonathan Norman. While both Lehman and Norman vehemently denied the accusations levelled against them, Glaven chose to remain completely silent, never offering a public statement. The scandal had truly ignited just before this, at the stroke of midnight on July 31st, 2020. It was then that actor Brad Garrett sent out a bombshell tweet claiming the toxic culture on the show started at the very top and that he was personally aware of multiple people who had been treated horribly. The social media post went viral almost instantly. Actress Leah Thompson threw her support behind him just hours later, confirming true story it is. Suddenly, the quiet whispers from industry insiders turned into public conversations, and the battle lines were drawn as defenders also began to surface. Music executive Scooter Braun, for instance, described Ellen as a kind, thoughtful, courageous human being, painting a starkly different picture of the talk show host. Ellen's own wife, Portia de Rossi, made her loyalty clear with a simple post that read, "I stand by Ellen." Pop superstar Katy Perry also chimed in, stating that her own interactions with the show had been exclusively positive. Comedian Kevin Hart labelled Ellen one of the dopest people on the planet, and veteran host Jay Leno declared he wasn't about to throw away a 4-decade-long friendship based solely on rumours and hearsay. However, the voices of criticism were growing far louder and more numerous. Fellow talk show personality Andy Richter highlighted the glaring hypocrisy of Ellen's famous "Be Kind" slogan in light of the mounting accusations of cruelty. Musician Phoebe Bridgers didn't mince words, branding her Ellen DeGeneres. Meanwhile, beauty influencer Nikki Tutorials recounted her own guest appearance, describing the host as disappointingly cold and distant. Even Tony Okongowa, who served as the show's beloved DJ for a full decade from 2003 to 2013, publicly confirmed that he too had experienced and felt the toxicity of the environment. This clear division among public figures was incredibly telling. It seemed that the A-list celebrities, many of whom had directly benefited from the massive exposure of Ellen's platform, were the ones rushing to her defence. In stark contrast, individuals who had actually worked for her or interacted with her away from the cameras were telling a completely different and much darker story. A distinct pattern began to emerge, suggesting that Ellen carefully maintained two very different public and private personas. She was reportedly incredibly charming and warm to her powerful peers, but behind the scenes, she was a controlling figure to her own subordinates. The official investigation by Warner Media concluded there were deficiencies related to the show's day-to-day management. This carefully worded, bland corporate statement, however, was clearly concealing much more serious and damaging findings. Behind that vague language, the investigation had essentially validated the claims of a toxic workplace culture, an inadequate response from human resources, and significant failures from the management team. Yet the way the findings were framed strategically pointed the finger at middle management, conveniently sidestepping any blame for the leadership at the very top. At this point, Ellen's damage control strategy became crystal clear. The plan was simple: dismiss the producers' professed complete ignorance of their actions and reposition herself as a victim who had been betrayed by a few rogue employees. During a video conference with her staff, she insisted that she had been completely unaware of the issues plaguing the set. After all, the show had over 2,000 employees. Her defence rested on the idea that it was impossible for her to know everything that was going on. But the staff wasn't buying it. They knew about the infamous Ellen gaze, and it was well known that male employees were even afraid to speak to her wife, Portia. This pervasive culture of fear was built entirely around catering to Ellen's personal preferences, and it was ruthlessly enforced by producers who knew their primary job was to protect her comfort no matter the cost to others. Therefore, letting those producers go was a necessary step, but it was far from a sufficient solution to the deep-rooted problem. The move simply removed the most visible offenders from the equation while leaving the underlying toxic system completely intact. Ellen was still there. The fundamental power structure hadn't changed at all. The message sent to the remaining staff was unmistakable. A massive scandal could be weathered by sacrificing a few middle managers to protect the all-important brand. For a fleeting moment, it might have looked like real accountability was taking place. But genuine accountability demands a person acknowledges their own role in the problem, and Ellen was already busy crafting a very different narrative for the public. This led directly to an apology that many felt rang hollow and ultimately a catastrophic collapse in the show's ratings. The 18th season premiered on September 21st, 2020, opening with Ellen's highly anticipated apology. Her carefully chosen words failed to connect with the audience. The phrase, "if I've ever let someone down," came across as deeply uncertain, as if she wasn't even convinced that any harm had actually occurred. Worse, she implied that the flood of criticism was somehow orchestrated, hinting at a conspiracy against her. Instead of seeing a sincere apology, many viewers just saw a powerful celebrity playing the victim. The earlier comments from Brad Garrett and Leah Thompson served as a potent reminder to the public that these issues were not recent developments. This behaviour had been going on for many years. Later, during an interview on The Today Show with Savannah Guthrie, Ellen was directly questioned about whether the allegations were a major factor in her decision to end the show. She responded defensively, stating, "If it was why I was quitting, I would have not come back this year." She then added, "I really did think about not coming back because it was devastating." She continued to paint herself as the injured party, insisting, "I am a kind person. I am a person who likes to make people happy." She pleaded ignorance, claiming, "I had no idea. I never saw anything that would even point to that." This stood in contrast to the official Warner Brothers internal review, which had already found deficiencies related to the show's day-to-day management. That, of course, was just corporate jargon for confirming that serious problems did exist. By then, the damage to her brand and the show was simply irreversible. Between September of 2020 and March of 2021, the show bled viewers with over 1 million people tuning out for good. The audience plummeted from an average of 2.6 million to just 1 million viewers, a staggering 43% collapse. Even more alarmingly, her core demographic of women under the age of 54 abandoned the show in droves, with viewership in that group dropping by 38%. The financial hit was substantial, as advertising revenue tumbled from $131 million to $105 million, representing a $26 million loss. While the apology episode itself saw a brief spike in viewership, the audience did not stick around. By the time 2022 rolled around, the once dominant programme was struggling to even keep its viewership above the 1 million mark. On May 12, 2021, the inevitable was announced. Ellen confirmed to The Hollywood Reporter that her long-running talk show would officially conclude after its 19th season. She framed the decision as a personal, creative one, stating, "When you're a creative person, you constantly need to be challenged. And as great as this show is and as fun as it is, it's just not a challenge anymore." The grand finale finally aired on May 26, 2022. After an incredible 19 seasons on the air, the era of her talk show was officially over. In a fitting bookend, Jennifer Aniston, who had been her very first guest, returned to help close out the series, joined by musical guests Pink and Billie Eilish. The controversy continued to echo, and in January of 2023, model Emily Ratajkowski spoke out in defense of Taylor Swift after an old uncomfortable clip from the show resurfaced online. "This is so messed up," she commented. Ratajkowski pointed out the obvious discomfort in the clip, adding, "She's literally begging her to stop." In an interview with Elle magazine, she elaborated that the clip was so striking because Swift was very clearly communicating her discomfort with the line of questioning. Yet the host and audience were all just laughing at her expense. "It actually upset me," she admitted. Ultimately, Ellen's public apology failed because it seemed to centre on her own feelings. The narrative was that she was the one who was devastated. She was utterly blindsided by the public onslaught. But the real story behind the scandal wasn't about her feelings. It was centred on the harrowing experiences her employees endured. Her complete refusal to accept any genuine accountability served as a glaring explanation for why that toxic culture was allowed to fester for so long. The subsequent collapse in ratings was a clear signal that audiences weren't buying her narrative. The Be Kind brand had been permanently shattered, proving you can't build a media empire on a foundation of kindness while running a cruel and unforgiving workplace behind the scenes. The hypocrisy was simply too jarring to overlook, and the mountain of evidence against her was far too overwhelming to dispute. Ellen's official story was that she was ending the show because it no longer presented a creative challenge for her. However, the timeline of events strongly suggested a different motive. The decision was announced amidst a catastrophic ratings freefall and as major advertisers began to pull their support. In reality, she was choosing to leave before she was inevitably forced out. After 19 years, 3,339 episodes and billions of dollars in revenue, it all came to a disgraceful conclusion. This led to a final public confession and a quiet escape to the United Kingdom. Ellen's 2024 Netflix special, tellingly titled For Your Approval, would become her final performance. She even made jokes about being ostracised from the entertainment industry for being mean-spirited. "Oh yeah, I got kicked out of show business. Yeah, because I'm mean. You can't be mean and be in show business. No, they'll kick you out. No mean people in show business." The delivery was thick with a defensive sarcasm, a way of acknowledging the public's perception without ever taking true responsibility. She opened up about seeking professional help. "I was in therapy for a while trying to deal with all the hatred coming at me, and it was not a common situation for a therapist to deal with. At one point, my therapist said, 'Ellen, where do you get this idea that everyone hates youth?' And I said, well, New York Times, Washington Post, Entertainment Weekly, US Weekly." Once again, she was carefully framing herself as the casualty of unfair media attacks. She described what her new reality was like. "Everywhere I go, I know everyone's heard that I'm mean. I know when I walk into a restaurant, people are watching, waiting to see if I'll be mean." She then shared the very first headline she saw that signalled her public downfall: how Ellen DeGeneres became the most hated person in America. Her reaction was a mix of pain and dark humour. It's a horrible thing to say about somebody. And to make it worse, there was no trophy, no awards, banquet, nothing. This was her signature dark humour, masking a profound and genuine hurt. During a Q&A session at her Santa Rosa stand-up show on July 1st, 2024, a member of the audience asked if she would ever return to fame. Her answer was sharp and definitive. No, this is the last time you're going to see me. After my Netflix special, I'm done. That special concluded with her reflecting on a life spent desperately trying to make other people happy. She admitted, I've cared far too much what other people think of me. So the thought of anyone thinking that I'm mean was devastating to me, and it consumed me for a long time. Soon after her comedy tour wrapped, Ellen and Portia made a life-altering move to the English countryside. In a July 2026 interview with the BBC, Ellen shared that their initial plan was a temporary stay, but those plans changed abruptly after Trump's re-election. We got here the day before the election. I woke up to lots of texts from our friends with crying emojis, and I was like, he got in, and we're like, we're staying here. Ellen raved about her new surroundings, calling the countryside absolutely beautiful and praising the charming local villages, towns and architecture. Everything you see is charming, and it's just a simpler way of life. We love it here. Portia flew her horses here, and I have chickens, and we had sheep for about 2 weeks. Everything here is just better. The way animals are treated, people are polite. I just love it here. In July of 2026, however, they put the property on the market for $30 million, explaining they needed a location with superior facilities for the horses. And with that, Ellen had truly escaped. After building and then losing a billion-dollar brand, she retreated to the tranquility of the English countryside, where her celebrity and her scandal meant very little. The woman who had spent an entire lifetime desperately seeking the approval of others finally stopped performing. The ultimate cost for her peace of mind was everything she had ever built. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Please like, comment and subscribe for more content. You can also check out another fascinating story by clicking on the video suggestion now showing on your screen, model.